Backstabbing and wholesale chaos, House Republicans unanimously selected Louisiana Congressman Mike Johnson as the 56th Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives this week. Now, Johnson is a little-known guy within Washington, so he's likely to be a very unfamiliar face to most of America, meaning he is an opposition's researcher's dream, thanks to his 20-plus years of far-right ramblings on radio shows and in newspaper columns that probably flew mostly under the radar until now. As put by Politico, Mike Johnson is a social conservative's social conservative. His voting record has earned him a lifetime rating of 92% from the American Conservative Union and a 90% from Heritage Action. In Biden's first 2 years, Johnson voted against a slew of bipartisan bills, including the 2021 Infrastructure Law, the Reauthorization of Violence Against Women Act, a modest new gun law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and one to establish a January 6th independent commission. But frankly, those votes also failed to convey the extent and the severity of Johnson's radicalism. So let me just share a few of his own words. In an editorial that ran in his local Louisiana paper, Johnson once called homosexuality an inherently unnatural and dangerous lifestyle that would lead to legalized pedophilia and possibly even destroy the entire democratic system. His words. Joining me now is Congressman Mark Pocan, chair of the Congressional Equality Caucus. Congressman, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming back on the show. Talk to me a little bit about MAGA Mike here. I got to get your, we'll get to that in just a second, but I got to get your reaction to Judge Tanya Chutkan reinstating that gag order on Donald Trump. What do you make of that?
Well, thanks for having me. Innocent people don't do what Donald Trump does, right? I think he keeps signaling over and over that, he's guilty on this. And every time he decides to go after someone, he's just digging his hole deeper. So I'm glad the judge did it. It's the right thing to do. But, Donald Trump is Donald Trump. We've had other people who've become presidents and then become a criminal like Nixon. In this case, we got a criminal who became president, and we're dealing with the after effects.
And let me get your thoughts now on Mike Johnson, the new Speaker of the House. What was your reaction to him securing that House speakership, given everything that I just read about his personal beliefs and his comments about homosexuality?
Yeah, this is the modern House Republican caucus, right? We saw the chaos of the last 3 weeks where we couldn't even have a speaker. When they finally pick one, they pick one who is one of the most extreme members. This is someone who orchestrated the election denial after Trump's loss, who said that we should challenge the Electoral College votes of places like Wisconsin. So, he's been the architect of that, much less what you've talked about. He thinks that activity between two consenting adults should be criminalized. He thinks that no abortion should be allowed in any form. He's got a bunch of positions that are far off of where the mainstream of the United States is, and it's going to be interesting to see how he actually governs with beliefs like that.
So speaking of his beliefs, when someone says, go pick up a Bible in response to a question about their past bigoted statements, when someone suggests on their podcast that they don't believe in the fundamental ideal of a separation of church and state, how do they secure the unanimous support of the House Republican Conference? And more importantly, how do you govern when you have to deal with people across the aisle who do not share those extremist views?
This is an extreme Republican caucus. They made a decision earlier this year. They weren't going to come and get Democratic votes. We had offered a bipartisan path forward to share governance so that we could have a speaker when they couldn't pick one for 3 weeks. And now they finally picked one, but America's finding out just how extreme this person is. But they're fine with that. It was a unanimous vote. So I think we have a bit of an idea where the modern Republican Party is. There's a reason why many people think it's less of a political party than it is a cult of Donald Trump. Whatever Donald Trump wants, they get. Donald Trump wanted Mike Johnson, and he got what he wanted.
There are some that have suggested if there's any silver lining in all of this, the election of Mike Johnson to speakership, it is that at least now the cat is out of the bag, so to speak, that Republican lawmakers in some of these purple districts, I believe 18 or so that went to Joe Biden but have Republican representatives, they can no longer claim to be moderate on gay rights because they all voted for this man and what he represents and what he stands for. Do you agree? Do you see it as much? I mean, how much of an issue should Democrats make of his speakership in 2024?
Well, maybe most of America hadn't heard of Mike Johnson before last week, but the entire Republican caucus clearly knew who he was, and they knew everything about him, his positions on criminalizing gay sex, on banning all abortions, regardless of the conditions, of trying to rig election. They knew all of those things and said, yep, that's exactly what we want to lead us. I think that's so far out of the mainstream, not just of Democrats and independents, but even Republicans are not. Many Republicans I know are not in step with those extremist positions. So it's going to be, I think, a tough sell for them to try to make a case next November that they belong to be in the majority when, you know, we've watched the chaos of the caucus this whole first part of the year. And I think you're going to continue to see it happen. It's going to be difficult to govern.
Yeah, and we've, speaking of difficult to govern, we've wasted 4 weeks waiting for Republicans to elect a speaker, and now we have about 3 weeks before they have to make some very tough decisions about a funding bill that will require bipartisan approval and certainly working with the White House. Congressman, if you don't mind, please stick around. I want to squeeze in a quick break, but on the other side of it, I want to discuss with you the Biden administration's handling of the Israel war in Gaza, what Speaker Johnson said about aid funding earlier today. Today, President Biden spoke on the phone with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about developments on the ground in Gaza. According to a statement from the White House, Biden reiterated that Israel has the right to protect its citizens from terrorism and, quote, underscored the need to do so in a manner consistent with international humanitarian law that prioritizes the protection of civilians. His administration's approach has been shaped by a series of political balancing acts that he is facing both here in the U.S. and abroad. But as the number of Palestinians killed by Israel's bombardment rises by the day, some parts of his base believe Biden isn't doing enough to prevent loss of innocent life in Gaza. NBC reports that Arab and Muslim Americans in Michigan say their support was critical to Biden's winning the state back in 2020 and warn they won't back him over his blanket support for Israel in the next election cycle. Democratic Congressman Mark Pocan is back with me. He's a member, of course, of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and has called for a cessation of hostilities in Gaza. Congressman, thanks for sticking around for us. I appreciate you taking some time for us to discuss this. House Speaker Mike Johnson said today that he thinks a standalone Israel aid bill will likely pass the House this week. He does not want to see one that includes funding for Ukraine. How are you planning to vote if such a measure is introduced, and what do you think about his approach?
I want to see exactly what he's talking about because he's brand new and we're not quite sure how he governs. But already $14.3 billion additional dollars in assistance to Israel, and a very small amount of that, actually additional money going to humanitarian aid, is problematic. This is really about, they don't want to fund Ukraine, which is about $63 billion as part of the security supplemental the president gave to Congress. But to carve that out, first of all, I don't think the Senate's going to take just that up on its own. It's probably going to come back to us with everything. But I have a real problem just continuing to fund Israel with munitions and extra weapons when we see what's happening right now. Clearly, conditions have to happen to our money, or the White House has to be very stern in saying you have to allow humanitarian supplies in. You can't target just blanketly civilians. And, the fact that now over 8,000 people have been killed, including 3,000 children. 3,000 children are not Hamas. They're not Hamas. Let's understand that. And we need to have a much more active role so that we can make sure more innocent people, the 2.2 million people who live in Gaza, are protected during what Israel, rightfully so, sees as their ability to go back after Hamas. It's such a small part of the population there. We have to protect the masses, and that's 2.2 million people.
There is a significant divide, or at least certainly one that has been growing between traditional and progressive Democrats over the way the White House has been handling this war and its unconditional backing of Israel. The New York Times reports a left-leaning coalition of young voters, people of color, are showing more discontent toward the president than at any point since he was elected. What do you make of this backlash against President Biden? Why are we seeing so much energy around this issue right now?
Yeah, I think everyone gets what Hamas did was horrific, whether the attack and killing women and children and babies. And that's something that's a pretty universally felt. But the response appears to be a collective punishment of Palestinians who live in Gaza rather than strategically going after Hamas. And I think that's what people are seeing. And you can't continue to see thousands of children killed when they're telling us they're going after Hamas. When you see the leveling of blocks, that is not a strategic attack to go after Hamas. And I think it's our own eyes and ears that are seeing things that are different than what we're hearing. And, you know, the president, to his credit, does not wear his foreign policy on his sleeve. He is having a lot of back channel conversations. I just think we need to have even more because the fact that, you know, they allowed one day 20 truckloads of humanitarian aid in, and another day 17 truckloads for 2.2 million people. You know, 500 truckloads a day used to go into Gaza with food and water and fuel, and they don't have that right now. And the situation is dire. Hospitals don't have equipment, and we need to do more since we are such a large funder of Israel. I just think it's incumbent on us to make sure that we're being heard about really providing humanitarian aid, stopping the bombing, and whatever term people want to use, honestly, you know, if you want to call it cessation of hostility, ceasefire, we just need to make sure that we're not killing innocent people anymore, which we are doing too much of.
The conflict, as you very well know, sir, has also exposed some very sharp divisions among students and at colleges around the United States. At Cooper Union, for example, you had this tense and scary moment between Jewish students and pro-Palestinian protesters. It was filmed, shared widely on social media. We're seeing a marked increase in both anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim incidents and rhetoric around this country. What kind of dynamics are we seeing play out right now, and how do we address these issues? What should we be hearing from the leadership in this country as the situation boils over here in the United States?
You know, the very first week, I helped lead a letter that 55 members of Congress signed to the president. One of the points was to help call out this type of what we saw bias that was going to happen. Look, you know, Hamas is a terrorist organization that did a horrific attack. And I think people, again, agree to that fact. But when they see what's going back and forth and the civilians being killed and the children being killed, it's starting to cause real unrest among many people. And, you know, I think that's where we just have to get involved to make sure that the killing does stop and that we can try to get to some sort of a peace process, because it is in our best interest. You know, the Middle East is obviously crucial for foreign policy, and we are a huge funder of many of these weapons systems. So, you know, I think taking a more active role, I was glad to see the president appoint a special envoy. Some of us have been asking for that for years because we think more attention has to happen to the region. But, you know, there's going to be a lot more attention that has to continue, because what is the final outcome of this? I'm not sure if right now the Israeli government has given us any idea. I don't know if they have an idea of what it is. But, you know, at the end of the day, Gaza was an open-air prison. You couldn't leave, come and go as you wanted to, because you were controlled by either Israel or a couple entrances at Egypt. It's been awful conditions, honestly, for decades. And we need to make sure that humanity is actually recognized. And that hasn't been, I think, in the last several weeks for sure.
We'll see how it plays out. Congressman Mark Pocan, thank you. Thank you so much, sir. It's always a pleasure. Greatly appreciate you making time for us tonight. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.